Hey, everybody, welcome. I have a special guest today. I'm going to be interviewing my good friend, Michael Dougherty. Michael is a filmmaker, writer, and he's the co-founder slash director and head programmer of the ReelAbilities Film Festival. Michael, I just wanted to hand it over to you. If you could just go ahead and tell people what ReelAbilities is, what it's about, and yeah.
Sure, and thanks for having me. So ReelAbilities is a disability-centric film festival that started in New York about 12 years ago. And I'm from New York and moved out here about 10 years ago. And my mother had sent me an email with an NPR interview with one of the founders. And in that interview, he talked about how real estate was the issue for not being able to get it to Los Angeles. And I, in my grand naivete, said, well, that shouldn't be a problem because it's a big city and there are over 160 film festivals, I think, per year. And they don't have anything that's disability related. So I thought we should be able to change that, because the sort of ethos of the whole thing was to tell stories by and for the disability community. And in terms of the diversity conversation, that wasn't happening. And this was a step to try to change that.
One of my questions for you off the bat was, and you've kind of alluded to it, but just to clarify, is it more focused on filmmakers who are disabled, or is it films about people with disabilities, or is it both?
It tends more largely towards the stories themselves. In terms of authentic representation. So we want to show movies that have actual actors with disabilities portraying that, as opposed to what Hollywood often does. But we are getting more and more filmmakers with disabilities behind the camera. And that was particularly accentuated by the creation of the Disability Film Challenge through Easter Seals that my friend Nick Novicki started. In which it's a requirement that there be at least one person in front of and behind the camera when they're telling this story, which I think they do it in like 55 hours or something like that. So we're trying to encourage more of this community telling its own stories.
Cool. I've heard some people say they prefer differently abled as opposed to disabled. So is there a generally accepted proper etiquette, or is it subjective to the person? Or what's your perspective on that?
Well, more and more I see that people within this particular community are trying to own disabled or disability as our thing. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, because I still have the feeling that disabled was kind of pushed on us by the so-called able-bodied community as a way of creating this binary, with us, like we're better and you're broken and not able. So that's always kind of made me uncomfortable. And this subject alone I could talk about for hours. But I think often we say people with disabilities. I think that would be the most accurate and safest way to be. Although I was born with spina bifida and hydrocephalus. Those are two inescapable scientific facts. Everything else is just rumor and conjecture as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. I guess what I would take from that is it's somewhat dependent on the person, but in the community, it's more preferred to say maybe people with disability. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess the subtext of all this is like, ask the person
right
how they feel and what they want,
as
opposed to just deciding for them.
So you said the festival's been going for about 13 years.
12, yeah.
When we talked before, I thought I heard you mention it's only been like about 3 years. Is it just maybe the LA leg of this festival that's only a few years old?
Correct. So when I got that email from my mom about maybe 5-6 years ago, and I joined up with Elisa Schlesinger, who is one of the commissioners on disability for the city of Los Angeles. So she's tapped into the sort of socio-political aspects of this experience. And I just said, you want to make a film festival? And she said, why not? And neither one of us knew what to do necessarily in terms of infrastructure. So it took a few years of failed attempts before she said, well, why don't we take it to the Department on Disability for the city of Los Angeles through the mayor's office, and they can help create that infrastructure, and we'll just go from there. And so that was about 4 years ago. And yeah, we had our inaugural launch at the NoHo 7 3 years ago, and then we went to Universal City Walk last year, and now because of the pandemic, we're doing it all virtual.
So how many? I was going to say how big is the festival, but what I mean specifically is how many films are typically curated every year, and is it all features, or is it shorts and features, or is it a mixture of the two?
So the program in general is narrative features, documentaries, and shorts with panels that we mix in about current topics. And in the past, we've had a lot more because we had a lot more time and space to do things, but because we had to kind of shrink things down this year, and I always preferred it to be smaller. There are other festivals that will run for over a week, but we're so new, and I'd rather just have a lot in a short amount of time. So that's why ours is a weekend. This weekend it'll be October 16th through the 18th. And we're opening with the movie Give Me Liberty, which is a narrative feature about a medical transport driver that's having a particularly hard day trying to get people to where they need to be. From there, we go on to Saturday, which is a number of documentaries, plus a block of shorts from around the world. One of the documentaries that we're showing is called Bedlam, in which we're going to do a Q&A with the filmmakers afterwards. And it's about the mental health crisis, particularly in Los Angeles. So it's a movie that everybody should tune into if you're from here and you understand anything about the homeless problem and the cross-section between mental health and homelessness. And then on Sunday, we're going to have, like I mentioned, the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge. They had their winners, so they had 3 films, and they made them in quarantine as documentaries. And so we're going to be showing those winners and having a discussion. And then we're having 2 things I'm very excited about. We're doing a 30th anniversary screening of Edward Scissorhands, which is a movie that has defined my experience as a filmmaker and as a person for 30 years. We're going to show that, so I'm very excited about that. And then Caroline Thompson, who wrote it, is going to stop by on Zoom, which is how we do all the Q&As, and we're gonna chat. And then we're going to close the festival with showing A Patch of Blue, which is a movie from the 60s with Sidney Poitier, where he falls in love with a blind white woman. And that is followed quickly by a panel called Black Disabled Lives Matter, in which we're going to attempt to sort of interrogate this past year that we've been having in terms of all the racial unrest, plus the pandemic, and how the disability and civil rights movements can assist one another. So it'll be pretty powerful, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just saw A Patch of Blue for the first time a few months ago, and I'd never heard of it before. And that's a movie definitely more people should see. So it's actually kind of interesting. I wanted to talk about a little bit how you and I met. It was really sort of random. And it's funny because we've never actually met in person, although we've been in the same room before, which is also another weird layer to this. So
I think we've probably been in several rooms together at
right. Yeah.
one point or another. So.
Yeah. With different films we've talked about before at festivals screenings that we both attended. I met Michael on Facebook. I had a friend some years back who said, "Oh my God, like I realized you're so into movies. Like I know a guy you'd be great friends with. And it's funny because this person who introduced us, like through Facebook, I guess you and I are not in contact with anymore. But she was just somebody who I knew through another friend, and yeah, so we just kind of made this random connection through somebody else. And I guess, yeah, over the years we sort of interacted vaguely on social media. Just, I remember really seeing some of the reviews that you posted and really resonating with them and enjoying them. And then when the pandemic lockdown started, through this progressive church I attend, Central Avenue Church, over the years, they sponsored a movie club that I did called Filmosaphy, which I'd host once a month. And they basically allowed me to do whatever I want with it, which was awesome. So I generally was picking films that I thought would prompt great conversation. We would gather in person, we would eat pizza, drink some beer, and talk about it afterward. But yeah, once you can no longer meet in person, I talked to my friend Aaron, who's the pastor of Central, and he said, yeah, why don't you use the Zoom channel and we could host these discussions. So I came up with this Facebook group, and Michael hopped on our first Zoom call. And I was doing a slew of Ingmar Bergman films back then, because I was like, I want some people to talk about these with. And we did, I think it was Seventh Seal was the first one, right? Yeah.
First one.
Yeah, so we did that. We talked about it, and I geeked out when I heard from Michael that he had actually met Bergman in person. As a massive Bergman fan, I was blown away. I was geeking out a little bit over that. We had some conversations, and you basically attended every single one of our Zoom calls since, and so yeah, we've kind of become friends over that, and we have a lot of overlap in our film interests.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think initially what had happened was, before the pandemic, I got one of those evites to Filmosaphy at the church, right. And it was for the Decalogue, which to my mind is the single greatest work of art ever filmed, period, full stop.
Right.
But I didn't know where it was. It seemed like it was really far away, and I didn't drive, and I was like, who is this guy? Like, yeah. I didn't understand it. But I saw those occasionally pop up over the years. And then you're right, when the pandemic hit, and then we all sort of had to rework how we were going to live our lives and just do stuff, it came up again. And I immediately jumped on that, because I thought, you know what, I know you don't know these people. I know you might be afraid of the religiosity potential of it, but you also love movies, so just do it. Just hop on. And it's one of the great things I've done this year.
I mean, it's something I look forward to every week. And honestly, Michael, I was going to mention too, because this I sort of tangentially created this Facebook group. I morphed it a little bit from the original Filmosaphy structure I had in person, which was mainly just open to whoever wanted to attend. And, there's a discussion would sometimes get theological or philosophical, but the main point was to have a conversation. But this one was actually because I was part of another Facebook group, and I had met a few other friends that I've also made, and we've all mutually made through these discussions on this group's called Exvangelical, which are a lot of people who are raised in sort of this evangelical church and setting, and sort of have deconstructed from that belief system, whether it's believing a different form of Christianity or believing in some other just nothing at all, really, or what have you. But we all have sort of this shared background. But your background is a little bit different. So I'd like to actually ask you about your background with religion, because it's a fascinating story to me. And I also want to just throw in there, how does that intersect with your interest in film and cinema?
So I was raised Irish Catholic by a former priest and a former nun. And there wasn't any scandal of the cloth. They actually met after they had both decided to leave their work in the church and have a family. And I'm the middle child. I have an older sister and a younger sister. And like I said, I was born with spina bifida. and hydrocephalus. And so I spent the first 10 years of my life basically in and out of hospitals. And when I wasn't there, I was in Catholic grammar school, which is something that I would not wish on my worst enemies, because of the cruelty of children and the inability of those nuns to particularly do anything constructive to help me because I was being bullied a lot. And so I found a kind of sanctuary in the movie theater. In fact, my earliest childhood memory was when my mom took me to see E.T. when I was 3, and I had been recovering from brain surgery, so my head was wrapped in bandages and I was in a lot of pain and discomfort. And when the movie started and that ship came down with all those beautiful lights, I didn't feel any pain anymore. I remember that distinctly as a 3-year-old. And the proof of that in some ways is that throughout the rest of my creative life, I think I really drew a very clear line in between the creation of art or the experience of art and the relief of pain. And I think that was certainly, to round back to the film festival, was sort of a spiritual and emotional and political thing for me for wanting to create. Is I wanted to give people a space who would often be experiencing pain, a place to put that and talk about it and feel safe. And it's the thing I'm proudest of in some ways. But when I saw Edward Scissorhands when I was about 10 or 11 years old, that completely changed my life, because seeing that performance from Johnny Depp and the way that Tim Burton and Caroline Thompson made it, I saw myself for the very first time reflected back at me. And I didn't realize that I had been starving for that the entire time. And so I to myself decided I really wanted to make movies, but didn't declare it, didn't come out as a filmmaker for another few years. And I told my parents, and they're like, yeah, all right, cool, go to film school. So I ended up going to NYU, which I hated, mostly because there were film students there. And it was not a great experience, but it pushed me later on to say, you know what, you really actually can do this, and screw anybody who tells you can't. And that was kind of a reflection of how I was raised, which was you're in the mainstream, you're with everybody else, you have to figure this out, go and do it. And it was never easy, and it still is not easy. But I certainly wouldn't be here today without the movies, and I certainly wouldn't be here without how my parents ended up raising me. I think that they have believed in my career more than I have at times, because they know how important this has been for me, and how life-affirming and life-giving it's been. And so, in a sense, anything that I get involved with is a way to sort of give back to them, and to film itself, to say thank you for being there for me. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I feel something kind of similar, because my background is pretty different, but getting sort of the impulse to make art in the form of film was something that grew for me sort of in high school, more so. And it's interesting, because I was initially going to Bible college in order to be a pastor, but during that time, I started to see a spiritual language unfold in film that, for me, worked better than traditional theology. There was something almost holier about great films that I was finding than, being inside of a church service. And so that kind of, it was within a year of going to Bible college, I decided, like, this is definitely not for me.
Did you, if I can interview you for a second, did you want to be a pastor, or was that something that you felt that was thrust upon you, and that, like, that you were obligated?
That's a good question. My goal was like, hey, I can do both. I can get my pastor thing, and then I can, go to film school after that, and then sort of figure out like this is where what I want to do for my quote unquote ministry, and then go this other direction and articulate maybe theology through this craft as a kind of thing. But basically, after my first year of Bible college, this is not for me, but I'm going to get my AA, and then I'm going to transfer and go to a Christian college. Mainly, I wanted to go to Biola because I heard they had a great film program, and I knew I could probably get in because I had one professor who taught at both. That actually did end up working out, but yeah, it was still a college that's through this evangelical lens. When I transferred colleges, I decided, hey, I'm only doing this because I took so many Bible classes. I want to make them count for something, so I can still get my my BA in 4 years. And that turned out okay, except it just attending another couple years at a religious school embittered me even more towards organized religion in a lot of ways, because it was literally, I went to Christian schooling for most of my life, except for like a couple years in high school. Years and years of indoctrination that I sort of had to undo myself. And yeah, but it was late in high school. I just discovered, I started to see something special, because I was already into theater at that point, and I loved acting. And that was sort of my gateway. Was I loved acting, but then I realized that I liked creating even more. And that's what I was sort of really starting to gravitate towards. I loved writing, and I just saw something in the concept of directing that was attractive to me. While I was at Biola, I met some other really cool people too, and I ended up just getting really entangled in the deep dive of different rabbit holes and a whole world of film that I did not know exist in different parts of the world and in different points in time. Part of the catalyst for that was my friend Jonathan, who invited me on this. There was a school radio show that he got a spot on. He's like, I don't know what I want to do with this, but I think that my idea is to review obscure films. He's like, you want to co-host with me? And I was like, I don't think I'm really the kind of voice for that, but fuck it, whatever, man, I'll give it a shot. So we did that, and yeah, that's when a sort of new flame began to take root, and that's when I just, yeah, I fell even more in love with it, but from just a totally different angle, discovering silent films and films from Europe and Japan that just like blew my mind, that I had no idea existed. And like that sort of became my evangelical bent, pivoted from telling people about God to like preaching the gospel of cinema that is not talked about nearly as often or as much.
I feel on the same path in many ways.
Yeah. And that was, and it was honestly during my faith deconstruction, my junior year. Yeah, it was like my sophomore or junior. Well, no, it had to be my junior year, because that's when I was at Biola. That's when I discovered the films of Ingmar Bergman, and I saw a kinship in this director of somebody who is wrestling with these ideas of faith and how that ties to life, and how that ties to existence, and how that ties to relationships. And yeah, I just went on a Bergman binge. I probably saw like 24 Bergman films in the first year that I discovered him, because they were available. This is before streaming and everything, so I would just go to the local library and look for all the Criterion DVDs. I guess you could say that was my initiation, so to speak, to the deep dive, at least.
In terms of that, my own sort of cross section between religion and movies, is that those were the main things that were at the dinner tables. That it was my parents' church, and then my church of movies. And that was always this free form discussion, and we went back and forth. And there was a key moment, I think maybe it was about 7 or 8, where my parents would sort of trot me out at dinner parties with their friends and family, And anybody in the room could ask me about a movie. And as a 7 or 8 year old, I could list actors and directors. And it wasn't so much that I even knew entirely what I was talking about. It was just stuff that I had read and absorbed because I was doing a lot of that. But I realized that it was like giving pleasure to people, that I could do this as a little kid. So I thought, oh, there's something in there. And I think I also wanted to be an actor too, because that's when I got to high school and was in the theater. In fact, I think I mentioned this, the man who directed me in all those shows in high school was also my AP English teacher, was a man named Father O'Malley, and he was Father Dyer in The Exorcist.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember you mentioning that. Yeah.
So I got to hear stories about that. And I had another great teacher named Father Brennan, who was my film teacher, and it was a cinema studies thing. And we learned about Bergman and all these different, filmmakers. And so that was sort of an explosive thing for me as well. All the while I'm having these struggles with God and basically an atheist. But these Jesuits that taught me were basically like, we don't have any answers. All we have are the tools in order for you to ask the right questions. And I thought, oh, I can hang with this. And so I kind of came away from the idea of organized religion, but was really into the idea of God and wondering about where God is in the world, if at all, and how do we live good and meaningful lives. And I found a lot of that reflected in the best movies that I saw.
Yeah.
Even if those movies were about the failure of goodness, they were still about goodness. So
the original subject that we were talking about was, with ReelAbilities specifically, the festival is, as you mentioned, all about championing and representing filmmaking of a disenfranchised community. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on where we are currently and where we are historically with that kind of representation in film. I know that you and I, one of the films that we watched for our Filmosaphy group thing was Freaks, and that's one discussion you hosted. And I know that that's a film that both of us love, and that's ironically actually one of the first films I reviewed. I remember back in college with my friend, and so that's a film in the pre-code time. So that was what, 1932, was it? Freaks? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and that's a film for those of you who don't know, that's about circus freaks, and it's just kind of telling a human drama. It's considered a horror film, but it's mostly just a human drama about how these people live together and some of them exploit each other. And it's a film that was heavily banned, or it was banned and it was heavily cut. The only available release now is like 60 or 70 minutes, whereas I think the full length was supposed to be like over 90 minutes. Do I have that correct, to your knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was that long, but there was a significant amount that they cut out, mainly as the legend has it, that the attack on the carriage by the circus performers of the trapeze artist and her strongman lover was apparently so graphic and so disturbing for 1932, or probably for any decade, that the studios told Todd Browning he just could not do this. So it's kind of secretly been one of my dreams to remake that movie and put back that violence,
yeah, as
a tribute to him and to the history of this particular subgenre.
Or you could do. So I didn't see that film, but I assume you're aware of Interior Leather Bar.
Yes.
Yeah, where the film Cruising supposedly had all of these like explicit gay sex scenes in this BDSM club, and was it James Franco, right, made this documentary about them trying to reimagine what the cut 30 to 40 minutes was from that film. So yeah, I mean, there's many angles you could go with that, but yeah, remaking it. I think remaking that film. Did they do a remake, or was it just they did kind of an updated like American Horror Story
Well,
season.
American Horror Story did a whole season called Freak Show that sort of was a reflection of that in some ways. But
Okay.
for me, what I would want to look at and what I think should be looked at is the sort of tension between the kind of agency that Todd Browning gives those characters, which hadn't been really done up to that point, and in some ways is kind of the final word. I mean, we're struggling to tell different stories, but there hasn't been a film about disability where those types of characters take care of themselves in the way that they do, especially in the end. But when you consider the violence and that you're right, you have this relationship movie that basically turns into a horror film in the end. You can't get past the discomfort of it being a kind of exploitation, because these people that society views as monsters ultimately end up doing exactly that. But I think that's something that we do have to look at, is why do people end up the way that they do? And I think a large part of that has to do with isolation and bad education and being constantly shunted aside. That, of course, at a certain point, things are going to explode. And doesn't make it right, but it makes it almost inevitable.
Right. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I remember one of the friends I had on this radio podcast, I guess, back in the day when we watched this film was somebody who basically was lauding what the film was until the final act, and then basically says it just completely shot itself in the foot and it became an exploitation film, and it completely nullified any positive message that preceded it. So you talked about that a little bit, but where do you stand on that final act? Does it work for you? Does it still work for you? Or do you think that it gets certain things wrong? Where do you stand with it?
Well, I think you have to sort of take it on two separate tracks. As a person living in the world, I am a pacifist. I mean, truly, full to my core pacifist. I don't believe that violence will ever solve anything, and you certainly can't achieve any kind of parity or peace by putting a gun to somebody's head. It's never, ever going to happen. My creative life is a completely different story. I want nothing if not chaos and insanity and full expression of who we are and, in fact, who we should not be. And I think that we impose our own morality on to these types of things, but people like Todd Browning should be given the full expression of being able to say, well, this is just cause and effect. That if you treat people a certain way, it is entirely possible that those people are going to lash out in ways that you are not going to be happy with, and that people are going to get hurt. And it's tragic in the end.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing that we have to sort of carry with us uncomfortably is this idea that they become themselves. They finally gain some level of freedom or equality by doing what they do.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I wanted to ask you, aside from Freaks, are there any other films historically? Well, actually, A Patch of Blue is one I can think of right now that you're doing at the festival this year that I also saw recently, and that is, I think, decent representation and sort of maybe equivocation of the treatment of somebody who, say, is blind, and racial tensions that were happening mid-civil rights. Are there any other films that come to mind for you that do it right, or do you think that it is just such a short list? Where do you stand in the hope spectrum, I guess is what I'm saying, as far as representation?
I think hope is nonsense. So I'm not so sure about that. But you know what? You actually raise an interesting question in terms of what is accurate and what is authentic. Because in fact, part of the reason that I was so excited to show Patch of Blue, and in fact it was Scissorhands, although there's another argument to be made with that movie, is that the actress that plays Sidney Poitier's love interest is sighted. And so you then get into the question, which is on everybody's mind in terms of disability and inclusion, which is the actors being able to actually portray the conditions of the characters. That's infrequently happening, and that I think is what makes something like Freaks or The Best Years of Our Lives, where Harold Russell plays the veteran who had his hands blown off and he has the hooks, and he's the only actor to win 2 acting Oscars in the same year because they gave him a special award.
Wow.
Because they didn't think that he was going to win Best Supporting Actor, and then he did. And it's the only time that that's ever happened. But there's certainly an argument to be made about always letting actors with disabilities play characters with disabilities. I can go either way on it, depending, because I think it can be pleasurable as an empathetic experience to watch a so-called able-bodied actor tie him or herself in knots trying to get at that experience. But I think in those cases, we're reliant more on the filmmaking and the writing, which just as frequently goes by the boards in terms of accuracy and authenticity, because actors or filmmakers such as myself are not getting to be able to tell those stories. They're always being told for us by more established people.
Right.
And so I think we have to get to a certain point where we're using our voices more and more. And I keep hoping that we'll be able to have more of like another independent cinema explosion where these self-expressions can come out. I mean, certainly the technology is there.
Right.
We can do things more cheaply and quickly. But your original question was about where do we stand in terms of the actual representations?
Yeah, sorry, I was just to articulate it a different way. So do you see substantive changes happening, say, in Hollywood when it comes to this stuff, or in general in the independent film circuits? Do you see more inclusion happening when it comes to disability representation, or is this still, in your eyes, just incredibly uphill and sort of a long way from these voices being heard properly?
Well, I think the problem is that, yes, it is still uphill. And I think there are some of us that legitimately need an elevator. And I think Hollywood has been slow to help build that elevator. I mean, you take things as simple as putting ramps in on film sets. It's like, that seems to me to be a no-brainer because everybody can use a ramp, whereas only a certain section of the population can use steps.
Right.
So if we just do simple things like that, and we bother just to think about that a little more, you make strides. The ship is turning very, very slowly, but that is the nature of the ship.
Right.
And there have been strides certainly in the acting community. We can see that, but in terms of the actual industrial side of filmmaking or production, we need to do a whole lot better. But I do think that in the independent world, there are opportunities. It's just that it's so exhausting trying to justify your existence to the world every single day that the idea of doing anything creative on top of that is sometimes I can't get my head around it because I'm so tired.
Right.
But I also know that this is the thing that put me where I am, and I need to honor that and keep pushing. And it's not really for me to like succeed. It's to make sure that the doorway is wide enough for the people coming up behind me are not going to have these conversations.
Right.
That we're only going to be dealing with givens. Because I think in terms of the representation, Yeah, Freaks is a perfect and brilliant and amazing example of where we can go in terms of that type of storytelling. But wouldn't it be great just to see like the disability version of Brokeback Mountain, where it's a generic, and I mean that in the sense of genre, not in the sense of like tired, but a generic love story that just has this one switch flipped on it. I look forward to that kind of stuff where we can just tell stories that anybody can get. And if you see a person in a wheelchair falling in love, or you see them being, the murderer, or you see them being the president, we don't even think about the wheelchair. We think about the person in the wheelchair, as I once heard George R.R. Martin say.
Right, right. Yeah. And so there's a lot to think about there. Because what I was thinking of was how there's been massive strides specifically for the LGBTQ community in the past couple decades or so when it comes to films. And what you're talking about, and I think I would imagine the goal of ReelAbilities is to expand that voice a little bit wider to an entire community. That, yeah, what was that statistic? Didn't you say, I saw you post recently, that 1 in 3 Americans have some sort of disability or something like that?
1 in 4.
1 in 4.
So it's something like 20 million Americans or something like that.
Yeah, so that's a huge number. Like, that's a pretty significant number of people that don't have stories commonly told about them. I mean, we're so used to like the superhero, like glorifying this sort of superhuman in the films that tend to make the most money. And I get that there's this fantastical element that people do love, but there's also, like Black Panther was this huge stride where many young Black people for the first time saw themselves on screen, or a character that looked like them.
Yeah, and I don't want to go on a Scorsesean diatribe against Marvel or superhero movies, but I think what really goes up my nose, particularly about those types of movies, is that, particularly with Marvel, which is really what I grew up on, is that all of those books and stories and mythologies are rooted in otherness, are rooted in issues of the body, and not seeing them as deficiencies, but as superpowers. And the movies have all but sidestepped that through line. And I'd be interested to know how they're going to reimagine X-Men, because that's sort of like the quintessential text.
Yeah.
But I've been so frustrated again and again, going, you guys know how to make these things actually become profound and not just about seeing the next thing. And Black Panther really was the one that hit for that particular bit of diversity, and I'm so happy for it. But it's like, we should have nothing but that,
right,
as far as these movies are concerned. And because it's 1 out of 4 people, they're sitting on a gold mine of people that want to see themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm appealing to the baser side of Hollywood who just wants to make money. Come take a look at this community, because there are stories to be told and mined from our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, man, like you said, it seems like a given, and it's bizarre that, I mean, I know you and I have talked about a couple examples of films like The Untouchables. It's like you see that happen every once in a while where, okay, there's a person in a wheelchair, or there's a blind person. I for the very first time actually recently saw Scent of a Woman, and I mean, okay, yeah, Al Pacino's a great actor, and he gets to chew the scenery for two and a half fucking hours on this one subject of him being a blind man. But yeah, we still don't really have that kind of representation. And you mentioned the guy from Best Years of Our Lives. That is an incredible movie. Like, I remember seeing that a few years ago and wondering why I hadn't heard more about it over the years. It's such a profound drama. And I was like, I remember being struck that, yeah, there's this guy who doesn't have hands who, won the award for this film. And it's sort of like there's little blips I see throughout history. It's just So we got Freaks, we got Patch of Blue, we got that one. I mean, are there any other prominent ones that you can really throw out there that are, I mean, we talked about Edward Scissorhands being thematically related.
Well, that's the thing, is that I tend to, my judgment is not so as much whether the performance is authentic, given the one-to-one between an actor with a disability versus with the character. But you take, I can think of plenty of negative examples, but if you take something like The Shape of Water, which was a hit, won Best Picture, and I know that Guillermo del Toro had the best intentions when he made that, but where I think he kind of screwed the whole thing up was by making the Sally Hawkins character mute, because the people of my respective community understood that as soon as the monster was there, that was supposed to be us. But he was going to flip it and say, well, not only is he going to be accepted, but they are going to fall in love and have graphic sex, and you're just going to have to deal with that. And then they can be together happily ever after. But the problem is that when you find out the nature of her by the end, and they're both underwater, what it was ultimately saying was, yes, they get to be together, but not in the world with the rest of us. They're away from us.
Right.
And I think that he sort of doubled down on the disability angle in a way that actually made the whole thing sort of come apart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy that people like that movie, and it is very, very strange and weird, and I liked where it was going. I just didn't like where it ended up.
Yeah, I that makes sense. I like a lot about that film, and I think Sally Hawkins was incredible. I think she's generally incredible. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that. There was an angle about it that bothered me, and I couldn't really articulate it, but I think you did. For anybody who can hear, if anybody hears some weird moaning in the background, that's just my cat. She's having fun today, just like singing in the background.
The theory is she likes the melodious sound of my voice.
Yeah, that is true, but she can't hear you right now, so she's responding to me.
Okay.
I was hoping. See, that was the thing, is we had a theory that she was really into Michael's voice, because whenever he would talk, she would wander beneath our my fiance Eunice and I. She would wander under our legs as soon as Michael would start talking. But she's just kind of all over the place today. Anyways, this was really fun. I'm glad you got to hop on here and we got to talk some shit. I guess I'll just let you wrap things up here. When is ReelAbilities? How is this going to function online? Because I know it's going to be a different format. Where can people get tickets? How much are they, etc.?
So ReelAbilities Los Angeles will be taking place October 16th through the 18th. We have one opening film on the 16th, and then we have full days of programming for the 17th and 18th. And you can go to ReelAbilitiesLA.org, and that's Reel, REEL, abilitiesla.org. And that should bring you up to where you can read about the festival and then order tickets. And there's a sliding scale. It goes anywhere from $8 to getting $40, gets you a pass for the whole thing, or you can buy individual day passes. And we're streaming the majority of the films through the ReelAbilities website, and you'll be sent a link to the film and to the subsequent Zoom Q&A, which we will be doing after every single film and for the panels. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention that apart from the Black Disabled Lives Matter panel, we're also having a panel called Mommy, Why Doesn't That Man Have Legs?, which is talking to children about disability. And among our panelists is we got the co-writers and directors of How to Train Your Dragon, the trilogy, to come talk. And I think that those are some of the great and most instructive disability narratives that we have, especially because they're aimed at children, because you got to start young with this kind of exposure. Yeah. So I'd recommend everybody see the trilogy before they sign on for that particular panel.
Great.
But like I said, yeah, you'll be sent emails once you register for a film or for the whole festival, whatever you want to do. And anybody can reach out to me on Facebook. It's Michael Dougherty, Dougherty, or you can get me on Instagram, which is Dougherty Film. And yeah, so it should be an eye-opening experience, hopefully for everyone.
Absolutely, man. I'm looking forward to
and
it.
I should say, yeah, no, I'm glad that you're all gonna come and at some point. The first thing that I laid on the table to the steering committee when we first started this all those years ago was that this can't be medicine. And what I'm proudest of is that we've been able to choose just good movies to watch and to talk about, that they're really all well done, and then hopefully the learning will come afterwards. So.
Great. Yeah, well, like I said, I'm looking forward to it. I hope everybody can hop on and get your tickets. What was the website again?
ReelAbilitiesLA.org, and that's Reel, REEL.
Cool. Yeah, actually, I'll just post the site in the description below on this video. So, all right. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for hopping in for this interview, and looking forward to the festival. And everybody out there, hope you're having a great one, and I hope you all can attend as well. Anywhere in the world, right? Is everybody able to come?
Everywhere in the United States. It's actually a fair question, so I can get back to you if you want to put an addendum to this little bit.
Sure.
But as far as I know, anyone in the country can, but I'd have to check on the world.
Got it.
But yeah, it's from the comfort of your own living room. As long as you have an internet connection and a screen, you can come join.
Sounds good, man. All right. Well, thanks for coming again. And all right, everyone, stay safe, stay sane.
Thanks, man.